Hey everybody, welcome back to Walking with Jesus Daily. This is the recording for day 315. We just had a good day, a long day, a painful day, a day where I could really be in thankfulness and really be in prayer. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the opportunity to grow. And I know that all of you are too. And as we read about what's taking place with Jesus, we'll continue to look deeper into this, what it looks like for us. We're just in Luke today, Luke 23, 6 through 12. And we'll read it in a couple different versions. And then just kind of let it be what it is, right? It's interesting that Luke is the only one to write about this, and he gets eyewitness accounts, and I'm very curious. But let's read this together. I hope that you have prayed. I hope that you have spent time in prayer. I hope that you thank God when your prayers have been heard and answered. I'm so thankful. I prayed that my parents would be safe, that my son would be safe in some of the travels and getting here and all that. And God just drove them on to their destinations like a Hot Wheel. And I'm just thankful that He's such a loving God, and I'm thankful that He gives me, if I make it to dinner tonight, then I'll have. And if my parents make it to dinner and my family, then I'll have one more dinner with them. And I think about dinners a little bit differently, considering that the disciples and Jesus just had their last meal. And they had no idea, even though Jesus was telling them that was going to be it. That the 13 of them would never all sit down together again, ever, to have a meal. And I know Steph has come to me about some of these recordings, and she won't mind me saying, but she said, I just didn't realize that they started to beat him before he even went to see Pilate. After he was with Annas and Caiaphas, and they decided he needed to die, they just spit on him and punch him and beat him. He's freezing cold already, and he's betrayed, and he's denied, and he's alone. And yet he said, the Father has never left me and never will leave me. I'm not alone. He's just stood before Pilate, and he's made it very, very, very clear that our kingdom is not here. And I had this discussion this morning again with one of the docs, and a complete misunderstanding of what this means and what Jesus is getting at and how we should live. If thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, and yes, I just said thy because I just memorized it that way, but if your kingdom come, God, on earth as it is in heaven, then that would mean that the kingdom of God from heaven would be lived out here on earth by those who live in His kingdom, who are invited in, adopted in to the kingdom. So we should look and live differently. And you say, well, what does that look like? Go look at how the church started in Acts 2. Build off of that, and don't make excuses. All right, getting off the soapbox here. I'll go on this for a while. Moving on, Luke 23, 6 through 12. Just pray. And when you pray, do more listening than you do talking, please. Just listen. Just sit with God and listen. You say, well, my mind wanders and I don't hear anything. Try harder. When your mind starts to wander, start giving him thanks. When you start giving him thanks, like real, honest, from your heart thanks, things change. When Pilate heard this, we'll have to go read it, right? Luke 23, ESV. He says, Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no guilt in this man." But they were urgent, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee even to this place." When Pilate heard this, verse 6, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time. Herod was a puppet king. We've heard about Herod, John the Baptist, Herodias. We've heard about Herod. Bethlehem. We've heard about Herod. Now this is a different one, but we've heard this name, right? We've studied this name. Go back and look up the word Herod and read it throughout the New Testament. Herod and Pilate were not friends. Herod wants to be king, but he can't do anything under Pilate, the governor of this area from Rome. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had long desired to see him because he had heard about him and was hoping to see some sign done by him. Herod was not interested in the saving power of Jesus because Herod didn't know he needed to be saved. He wanted to see some magic, a sign. I am not saying Jesus performed magic. Jesus did not perform magic. I'm just saying in his mind, not believing that he's the Son of God, able to perform miracles, his thought process was most likely some kind of magic, right? Okay, moving on. So he questioned him at some length, but he made no answer. Jesus said nothing. The chief priests and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing him. And Herod, with his soldiers, treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then, arraying him in splendid clothing, he sent him back to Pilate. And Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day. For before this, they had been at enmity with one another. They were not friends, in other words. All right, let's read a couple different versions. Passion Translation. When Pilate heard the word Galilee, he asked if Jesus was a Galilean. And when they told him yes, Pilate saw a way out of his problem. He knew that Antipas, son of Herod, ruled over Galilee, and he happened to be in Jerusalem at that time. So, most likely for the Passover, so Pilate sent Jesus to Antipas. Nice, right? Antipas is a nickname for Herod Antipater, son of Herod the Great. Herod the Great is one we know about from Bethlehem, right? The Greek text simply reads Herod, but this is a little bit more specific, so we're not confused with what Herod it is. When he, Antipas, saw Jesus, and I'm probably saying his name wrong, okay, just giving you a heads up. He was elated, for he had heard a great deal about his ministry and wanted Jesus to perform a miracle in front of him. Antipas questioned him at length, but Jesus wouldn't even answer him. Imagine, he stands before the king, and the king is asking him questions. And Jesus is the true king. So here's a king standing before a king. The high priest stood before a high priest, and now the king is standing before a king. Jesus gave him no answer. All the while, the high priests and religious leaders stood by, accusing Jesus of wrongdoing. Oh, good. So while you're being questioned by the king and not answering, you've got the high priests and the religious leaders standing by just yelling out things, accusations against you. And it says, so that Antipas and his soldiers treated him with scorn and mocking. Oh, you think you're the king? Look at you. You think you're going to take my position? Look at you. You're nothing. Who knows what they're saying? But it says Antipas put an elegant purple robe on him. Purple is, of course, royalty. Put a purple robe on Jesus and sent him back to Pilate. Now, I don't know how that day Antipas and Pilate healed their long-standing feud and they became good friends. Was it because Pilate gave the opportunity for Herod to make a judgment call on this? And then Herod sent him back to Pilate to make a judgment call on this, and they've been fighting over who had power? I have no idea. But I do know that the scripture tells us on this day, the day that Jesus was judged, they became friends. How great that Jesus could bring them together. That, of course, is sarcasm. Can imagine standing there being Lord of all, not answering questions when you could answer them easily, not standing up for yourself against accusations that you could very simply not only answer, but destroy. You could destroy them. All right. Amplified. When Pilate heard it, he asked whether the man was a Galilean, because he was stirring up trouble in Galilee. And when he learned that he belonged to the jurisdiction of Herod Antipas, the tetrarch of Galilee, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. Now, I do not remember. You're going to have to go back and read and correct me. I do not know that this was the Herod that beheaded John the Baptist and Herodias and all that stuff. I was simply reminding you of the name Herod. But could be. I don't know right now. I'm kind of thinking about this and not about that. So it says, see note on Matthew 22:17. So we will. Matthew 22:17 note is, tell us then, what do you think? Is it permissible according to the Jewish law and tradition to pay a poll tax to Caesar or not? I don't know what that has to do with anything. Did I even select the right one? All right, back to where I was in Luke 23. Yeah, 22:17. Okay. Back to where we are, verse 8. When Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly pleased. He had wanted to see him for a long time because of what he had heard about him, and was hoping to see some miraculous sign, even something spectacular done by him. And he questioned him at some length, but Jesus, he made no reply. And this is Isaiah 53:7. You can read about that. The chief priests, like a sheep before the shearer, right? The chief priests and the scribes were standing there, continually accusing him heatedly. And Herod, with his soldiers, after treating him with contempt and mocking and ridiculing him, dressed him in a gorgeous robe and sent him back to Pilate. We're going to read this, Isaiah 53, okay? Now that very day, Herod and Pilate became friends with each other. Before this, they had been enemies. Isaiah 53. We're just going to read a small portion of this, then we'll let it be yours. But if you haven't read Isaiah 53, read it. 7 and 8 read like this. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth to complain or defend himself. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that is silent before her shearers, so he did not open his mouth. After oppression and judgment, he was taken away. And as for his generation, his contemporaries, who among them concerned himself with the fact that he was cut off from the land of the living by his death, for the transgression of my people, to whom the stroke of death was due. It's hard to read this. I'm just going to read Isaiah up to that point and let you guys have this one. Who has believed confidently, trusted in, relied on, and adhered to our message of salvation? And to whom, if not us, has the arm and infinite power of the Lord been revealed? For he, the servant of God, grew up before him like a tender shoot, a plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He has no stately form or majestic splendor that we would look at him, nor a handsome appearance that we would be attracted to him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and pain, and acquainted with grief. Does this sound like the Jesus that you know? And like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we did not appreciate his worth or esteem him. But in fact, he has borne our griefs, and he has carried our sorrows and pains, yet we ignorantly assumed that he was stricken, struck down by God, and degraded and humiliated by him. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was crushed for our wickedness, our sin, our injustice, our wrongdoing. The punishment required for our well-being fell on him. And by his stripes, his wounds, we are healed. All of us, like sheep, have gone astray. We have turned each one to his own way, but the Lord has caused the wickedness of us all, our sin, our injustice, our wrongdoing, to fall on him instead of us. That's the first 6 verses. Now, if we get back to Luke, what are we learning here? There is a time for us to speak, and there is a time for us to be silent like Jesus. How do we know that time without first being silent to hear God speak? If you don't think God speaks, it's probably most likely because you've never listened. And if you don't believe, how can you hear him? Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are those who are persecuted for my name's sake. It is sad that Jesus is tossed around and no one wants to take him on because he's a problem. The Jews want him crucified. They want him to hurt. This is not love of country. This is hate of a person. This is pride of oneself. Pilate sees nothing wrong with him, but doesn't want to have to deal with the Jews with his judgment of saying he's fine, there's nothing wrong with this guy, I'm releasing him. Pilate's going to go through everything he can to get out of this. We'll keep reading about him. Herod is nothing. Herod is nothing. And now back to Pilate. And Herod and now Pilate become friends. What happens next? We'll find out tomorrow. Can I just encourage you? Can I encourage myself to be silent more often? Especially in times of tension. To simply pray and let God be God. I'm realizing more and more that God has never asked or called any of us unless he has directly to get anybody out of trouble. If they're in a trial, it's because they're supposed to be. It's okay to let them go through that trial and then walk with them. It's okay to not bail them out. Don't you think God could bail them out if he wanted to? They just need somebody to go through it with. God didn't bail Jesus out of this, but he never left his side. He strengthened him, he heard him, and he was with him. I pray that we can be like God when we see our friends in trial. I pray that we can be like Jesus when we're the ones in the trial and we call on the name of God. I'm thankful that Luke recorded this. I love you guys. I'll see you tomorrow.